When Michael Jordan walked into Chuck's diner that Tuesday morning, Sarah Thompson was too tired to even recognize him. After 16 hours on her feet and an eviction notice in her pocket, the tall man in the expensive suit was just another customer to serve. She had no way of knowing that spilling coffee on him would change not just her life, but the lives of hundreds of others. They say pride comes before a fall. But sometimes, pride comes before rising. Rising in a way you never expected. This is the story of how one waitress turned an act of kindness into a movement, and how sometimes the biggest plays in life start with a simple cup of coffee. Sarah Thompson's alarm buzzed at 4:30 a.m., just like it did every morning. Her hand reached out from under the worn blanket, fumbling to silence the noise before it woke Jasmine in the next room. The springs of her old mattress creaked as she sat up, and the chilly Chicago morning air made her pull her robe tighter around her shoulders. "Another day," she whispered to herself, forcing a smile as she looked at the framed photo of her mother on the bedside table. "I'll make you proud today, Mama." The bathroom mirror showed dark circles under her eyes, but Sarah had gotten used to those. 4 hours of sleep was becoming her new normal. She splashed cold water on her face and quickly pulled her curly black hair into a neat bun. Chuck's diner had strict rules about appearance, and she couldn't afford to lose this job. Not with the bills piling up. In the kitchen, Sarah quietly prepared Jasmine's lunch for school. A peanut butter and jelly sandwich, an apple from the discount bin at the grocery store, and the last granola bar from the box. She tucked a small note inside the brown paper bag. "Love you to the moon and back. Make today amazing, Mom!" Writing these notes was a tradition she'd kept up since Jasmine's first day of kindergarten. And even though her daughter was now 15, Sarah knew the little messages still made her smile. The kitchen table had become her unofficial office, covered with stacks of bills marked "Final Notice" in angry red letters. Sarah pulled out her worn notebook and did the math again, even though the numbers hadn't changed since last night. Rent was due in 3 days, $850. The electric bill was 2 weeks late, $143.27. Jasmine's asthma medication, $225. Her own blood pressure pills, $170. The numbers danced before her tired eyes, refusing to add up to anything but trouble. "Mom?" Jasmine's sleepy voice made Sarah quickly close the notebook. "You're up early again." "Morning, sunshine," Sarah said, pushing aside the bills and patting the chair next to her. "I picked up the early shift at Chuck's. Mrs. Martinez needed someone to cover for her. Her grandson's got a soccer tournament." Jasmine sat down, her school sweatshirt wrinkled from sleep. "You already worked a double shift yesterday, and the day before that." "That's because your mama's a superhero," Sarah said with a wink, getting up to pour her daughter a bowl of cereal. They were running low on milk again, but she'd get paid tomorrow. Besides, tips are better in the morning. All those business folks heading to work downtown. "I could get a job too," Jasmine offered, not for the first time. "Jenny's brother works at the mall, and he's only 16. Sarah shook her head firmly. "Your job is to focus on school, baby girl. Those straight A's are going to get you into college." She kissed the top of her daughter's head. "I've got this handled. Promise." But as Sarah walked the 6 blocks to Chuck's diner in the pre-dawn darkness, that promise felt heavier than usual. The eviction notice she'd found stuck to their apartment door yesterday was burning a hole in her pocket. 3 days to come up with back rent, or they'd be out on the street. She hadn't told Jasmine yet, couldn't bear to see the worry in those young eyes that already carried too much understanding of adult problems. The neon sign of Chuck's diner buzzed ahead, a familiar beacon in the darkness. Sarah straightened her name tag, pulled her shoulders back, and put on her best smile as she pushed open the door. The bell chimed cheerfully, and the smell of coffee and bacon wrapped around her like a warm hug. "There's my best waitress," Chuck called from behind the grill. The old man's white hair stuck out from under his chef's hat like cotton candy, and his kind eyes crinkled behind thick glasses. "You're early again, Sarah." Early bird gets the worm, right? Sarah tied her apron around her waist, checking to make sure she had enough pens in the pocket. "Besides, someone's got to make sure you don't burn the first batch of pancakes." Chuck laughed, flipping a perfect golden brown pancake with practiced ease. "Been flipping flapjacks since before you were born, young lady." Sarah started the coffee makers and began wiping down tables, falling into the familiar rhythm of opening duties. Her muscles ached from yesterday's double shift, but she pushed the fatigue aside. She couldn't afford to be tired, not when every tip counted. The morning regulars started trickling in as the sun rose. Old Mr. Peterson with his crossword puzzle, and black coffee. Maria from the flower shop, always ordering tea with lemon. The construction crew from the site down the street, hungry for big breakfasts before their long day. "Morning, folks," Sarah called out cheerfully, delivering plates and refilling cups with practiced efficiency. Her smile never wavered, even when her feet screamed for rest. Every thank you from a customer, every dollar in her tip jar, brought her one step closer to keeping a roof over Jasmine's head. During a rare quiet moment, Sarah slipped into the break room and pulled out the eviction notice again. The words hadn't changed. 72 hours to vacate premises. Her hands trembled as she folded the paper and tucked it away. She'd worked too hard, come too far, to end up back in a shelter. Jasmine deserved better than that. The break room door creaked open, and Chuck poked his head in. "You okay, Sarah? You've been in here a while." Sarah quickly wiped her eyes and stood up. "Just needed a minute to catch my breath. It's getting busy out there." Chuck's weathered face softened with concern. "You know, if you need help, I'm fine," Sarah interrupted, perhaps too quickly. "Really, Chuck, but thank you." She straightened her apron and headed back out to the dining room, where several new customers had just been seated. The morning rush picked up, and Sarah moved between tables with renewed determination. Each step, each smile, each careful balance of plates was a small battle in her larger war against poverty. She'd grown up watching her mother work 3 jobs to keep food on the table, refusing help even when things got tough. "Thompson women don't take handouts," she'd always said. "We make our own way." As Sarah refilled coffee cups and took orders, her mind raced through possibilities. Maybe she could pick up night shifts at the 24-hour drugstore, or early morning cleaning jobs before coming to the diner. There had to be a way to make the numbers work. The bell above the door chimed again, and Sarah grabbed her order pad without looking up. "Welcome to Chuck's. Seat yourself anywhere, and I'll be right with you." She didn't know it yet, but this customer was about to change everything. The tall man in the expensive-looking suit chose a booth by the window, away from the other customers. Sarah grabbed a menu and her coffee pot, fighting back a yawn as she approached his table. The morning sun streaming through the window caught the gleam of his watch. Probably worth more than her yearly rent, she thought. "Morning. Coffee to start?" she asked, already moving to pour. Most customers who came in wearing suits like that wanted their coffee yesterday. "Yes, please," the man said, his voice deep and friendly. He had a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, but Sarah caught a glimpse of a warm smile. "And maybe some recommendations? First time here." Sarah set down the coffee and pulled out her order pad. "Well, Chuck makes the best pancakes in Chicago. That's not just me being loyal to my boss. The breakfast specials, good value. 2 eggs any style, hash browns, bacon or sausage, and those famous pancakes." Sounds perfect, he said. I'll take that. Eggs over easy, bacon extra crispy. You got it. Sarah scribbled down the order. As she turned to leave, she noticed an elderly woman at the next table trying to catch her eye. I'm sorry, dear. The ID, woman said softly, looking embarrassed. But my card was declined, and I don't have enough cash. Sarah glanced at the woman's half-eaten breakfast and nearly empty coffee cup. She recognized her, Mrs. Chen from the senior center down the street. She came in every Tuesday, ordered the same $8.99 breakfast, and always left a $1 tip that she counted out in quarters. Don't you worry about it, Mrs. Chen, Sarah said quietly, touching the woman's shoulder. I've got it covered today. Oh, I couldn't. You can get me next time, Sarah insisted with a smile, even though her own wallet was empty except for a $5 bill she was saving for Jasmine's lunch money tomorrow. She'd figure something out. She always did. The man in the suit watched this exchange with interest, but Sarah was too busy to notice. The morning rush was in full swing now, and she moved between tables with practiced speed, refilling coffee, cups, delivering plates, and making sure everyone had what they needed. Order up! Chuck called from the kitchen. Sarah grabbed her regulars plates, Mr. Peterson's dry wheat toast and eggs whites, Maria's fruit bowl with yogurt on the side, and delivered them before heading back for the suit-wearing customers. Breakfast special. As she approached his table with the loaded plate, her comfortable work shoes caught on a loose tile, the same one Chuck had been promising to fix for months. Sarah felt herself stumble, and then everything seemed to happen in slow motion. The plate tilted. The eggs slid. The bacon flew. And the coffee in her other hand. Sarah watched in horror as the hot liquid splashed across the man's clearly expensive suit jacket. "Oh my God!" she gasped, quickly setting down what remained of his breakfast. "I am so sorry." She grabbed napkins from her apron pocket and started dabbing at the spreading stain, her hands shaking. This was exactly what she didn't need. Today, a lawsuit from some rich guy would be the final nail in her financial coffin, but instead of yelling, the man chuckled. "Don't worry about it," he said, helping her mop up the spill. "I've faced worse things than coffee stains." Sarah looked up, surprised by his kind tone, and finally got a good look at his face as his cap shifted. Her eyes widened. Even someone who didn't follow basketball knew this face. It had been plastered across Chicago billboards and television screens for years. You're Michael Jordan," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He grinned, and there was that famous smile she'd seen in 1,000 ads. "And you're Sarah," he said, nodding at her name tag. "How about we start over? Maybe with a fresh coffee and a dry napkin?" Sarah's face felt hot with embarrassment, but she managed a shaky smile. "Coming right up. And I'll get you a new breakfast, too. One that actually makes it to the plate." As she hurried back to the kitchen, she could feel every eye in the diner on her. Word had spread quickly about who was sitting in booth 7. Chuck poked his head out from the kitchen, his eyes wide as saucers behind his glasses. "Is that really?" he whispered. "Yeah," Sarah nodded, quickly starting a fresh pot of coffee. "And I just spilled coffee all over him. I don't suppose you'd consider that grounds for a quick and merciful firing?" Chuck laughed and patted her shoulder. "Are you kidding? Michael Jordan comes to my diner and gets the full-service experience. Coffee bath and all. That's going in the advertising." Sarah managed a small laugh, but her hands were still shaking as she prepared a fresh breakfast order. She couldn't afford to lose this job, especially not now. Even if Mr. Jordan had seemed nice about the spill, people could change their minds pretty quick when dry cleaning bills showed up. But when she returned to his table with the fresh coffee and food, he was still smiling. "Now this looks great," he said. as if the first attempt had never happened. "Join me for a minute. It's quiet in here now, and that breakfast special looks too good to eat alone." Sarah glanced around. He was right. The morning rush had died down, and only a few regulars remained. Mrs. Chen had left exact change on her table, along with a napkin with "Thank you, Angel" written on it in shaky handwriting. "I really shouldn't," Sarah began, but Jordan gestured to the empty seat across from him. "I insist. Consider it a trade. You tell me how long you've been working here, and I'll tell you about the time I spilled an entire plate of spaghetti on the governor of Illinois." Despite her exhaustion and worry, Sarah found herself sliding into the booth. There was something about his manner that put her at ease. He didn't carry himself with the arrogance you might expect from someone of his fame and success. "Chutkin, years at Chuck's," she said, pouring herself a small cup of coffee. "Started the week after my mother passed. She used to say a job's not just about making money. It's about building a life you can be proud of." Jordan nodded thoughtfully. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman. Mine used to say something similar. She taught me that true success isn't about what you have, but what you do with it." Sarah thought about the eviction notice in her pocket, about Jasmine's college dreams, about Mrs. Chen and her quarters. "Sometimes just getting by feels like success," she said softly, then immediately regretted being so honest with a stranger, even if that stranger was Michael Jordan. But Jordan's expression turned serious. "Getting by isn't enough, though, is it? Not when you've got dreams tucked away in that notebook you keep checking between tables." Sarah's head snapped up. She hadn't realized anyone had noticed her quick glances at her budget calculations throughout the morning. "You've been watching me?" "I've been watching everyone," he said. "It's a habit from my playing days. Always know what's happening on the court. And you, Sarah, you move like someone playing hurt but determined not to let the team down." Before Sarah could respond, the bell above the door chimed. A group of businessmen walked in, their eyes immediately locking onto Jordan's distinctive figure. Sarah stood quickly, straightening her apron. "I should get back to work," she said. "Thank you for being so understanding about the incident." Jordan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "Thank you for the company. And the coffee, both wearing it and drinking it." He smiled that famous smile again. "And Sarah. Sometimes the biggest plays start with someone being willing to pass the ball. Think about it." As Sarah walked away to greet the new customers, she slipped the business card into her pocket next to the eviction notice. She didn't know why, but it felt like a sign. Though whether it was a good one or just another tease from fate, she wasn't sure yet. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of coffee refills and dropped jaws as word spread about their famous visitor. By the time Sarah hung up her apron that afternoon, the story of her coffee spill had already become diner legend, with Chuck gleefully describing it to anyone who would listen. But it wasn't until Sarah got home and finally pulled out Jordan's business card that she discovered the check tucked behind it. Her hands trembled as she read the amount, enough to cover the back rent, the utilities, and Jasmine's medication, with some left over. Attached was a note in strong, confident handwriting. "Sometimes we all need a teammate. No coffee stains. On this, I promise." Sarah sank into her kitchen chair, the check and the eviction notice side by side on her worn tablecloth. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. Thompson women don't take handouts. But as she looked at the photo of Jasmine on the fridge, her beautiful, brilliant daughter who deserved every chance at a better life, Sarah wondered if, maybe, just maybe, her mother had been wrong about this one thing. She pulled out her notebook and began to write. Not numbers this time, but a plan. If Michael Jordan was willing to be a teammate, she would make sure it was a game worth playing. Sarah stared at the check until the numbers blurred. Her mother's old jewelry box sat on the shelf above the kitchen sink, and inside it was a photo she hadn't looked at in years. With trembling hands, she reached for it. The picture was creased and worn. Sarah, at age 10, standing with her mother outside a homeless shelter. They'd lived there for 6 months after her father left, while her mother worked 3 jobs to save, enough for an apartment deposit. Even in the photo, her mother stood tall, proud despite their circumstances. "What would you do, Mama?" Sarah whispered to the image. "Times are different now. Jasmine deserves—" The sound of keys in the door made her quickly tuck away the check and photo. Jasmine burst in, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Mom, you'll never believe what happened at school today. Everyone's talking about Michael Jordan being at Chuck's. Jenny said her cousin's boyfriend's sister was there and—" Jasmine stopped, mid-sentence, noticing her mother's red eyes. "What's wrong?" Sarah patted the chair next to her. "Sit down, baby. We need to talk." Jasmine's face fell. She knew that tone. It was the same one her mother had used when explaining why they couldn't afford summer camp, or why they had to cancel their cable subscription. She sat down slowly, her shoulders tense. "Is it bad?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Yes and no. The truth is, we're behind on rent. Way behind. I got an eviction notice yesterday." "What?" Jasmine's voice cracked. "But you've been working so much. All those extra shifts." "Sometimes working hard isn't enough," Sarah said softly. "But here's the thing. Michael Jordan really did come to the diner today. And—" She pulled out the check, sliding it across the table. Jasmine's eyes widened as she read the amount. "Is this real?" "It's real. He left it after I accidentally spilled coffee all over his suit." Sarah managed a small laugh. "And before you ask, yes, I'm absolutely mortified about that part. But Mom, this is amazing. This solves everything." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline in the distance. "Maybe, but you remember what Grandma always said about handouts. Mom." Jasmine's voice was suddenly older, more serious. "Grandma also used to say times change. Remember when she finally let the church help with her medical bills? She said sometimes pride costs more than it's worth." Sarah turned, surprised by her daughter's words. Sometimes she forgot that Jasmine had inherited not just her grandmother's bright mind, but her wisdom too. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Chuck's earlier than usual. She needed to think, and something about the quiet diner before opening always helped clear her head. But when she unlocked the door, she found she wasn't alone. Michael Jordan sat at the counter, talking quietly with Chuck. "Mr. Jordan." Sarah stopped short, her hand automatically touching her apron pocket where the check still sat, unused. "I didn't expect to see you again." "Please, call me Michael," he said, standing. "Chuck let me in early. I wanted to make sure you got my note, and to talk if you're willing." Chuck grabbed his chef's hat. "I'll go check the supply room inventory," he said, not very subtly giving them privacy. Sarah slid onto a counter stool, leaving one empty between them. "I got the check," she said quietly. "It's very generous, but your pride is giving you a hard time about it," Jordan finished. "I know something about pride, Sarah. It's what drives us to excel, to push through tough times. But sometimes pride can blind us to the assists life throws our way. Did you know," he continued, "that when I was first drafted to the Bulls, I didn't want to come to Chicago? I thought I could make it on my own in North Carolina. Stick close to home. My mother, she set me straight. Told me God gives us opportunities, but it's up to us to be brave enough to take them. Sarah twisted her apron in her hands. My mother taught me to stand on my own 2 feet, to never depend on anyone else's charity. Charity? Jordan raised an eyebrow. Is that what you call it? When you covered Mrs. Chen's bill yesterday? When you slip extra bacon onto Mr. Peterson's plate because you know his Social Security barely covers his medications? Sarah's head snapped up. How did you? I told you. I notice things. And what I noticed yesterday was someone who understands that helping others isn't charity. It's community. It's teamwork. He pulled out another envelope. That's why I came back. The check isn't charity, Sarah. It's an investment. An investment? Sarah took the envelope with shaking hands. Open it. Inside was a business proposal. As Sarah read, her eyes grew wide. Jordan wanted to create a foundation, one that would help service industry workers pursue education and business opportunities, and he wanted her to help run it. I don't understand, Sarah whispered. Why me? Because you remind me of my mother, Jordan said simply. She worked as a teller at a bank for years, dealing with other people's money while barely making ends. Meet herself. But she never lost her dignity, and she never stopped helping others. When she finally got a chance to advance, she made sure to bring others up with her. Sarah thought about her notebook at home, filled with not just budget calculations, but dreams she'd never dared speak aloud. Ideas for a catering business, plans for classes at the community college, a vision of something bigger than just getting by. The check, Jordan continued, that's to help you get stable. This proposal, that's about helping you build something lasting. Not just for you and Jasmine, but for others like you. People who just need a teammate to help them take their shot. Sarah's vision blurred with tears, but these were different from yesterday's. These felt like rain after drought, like sunrise after a long night. Can I think about it? She asked quietly. Jordan stood, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Take all the time you need. But Sarah, remember what I said about the biggest plays starting with a pass? Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is catch the ball when it comes our way. After he left, Sarah sat at the counter for a long time, watching the sun rise over Chicago through the diner's windows. Chuck came back, quietly starting his morning routine, giving her space to think. Finally, she pulled out her phone and dialed the number on Jordan's business card. It rang twice before his familiar voice answered. I'm in, she said firmly, but I have some ideas of my own to add to the proposal. She could hear the smile in his voice as he replied, I was hoping you'd say that. How about we discuss them? Over breakfast? I know this great diner, though I hear the coffee service can be a little exciting. Sarah laughed, and for the first time in years, it felt like she was truly breathing. Some might call it charity, but her mother had taught her something else too. When you're blessed, you become a blessing to others. She had a lot of work ahead of her, but for once, she wasn't facing it alone. News travels fast in a small diner, and even faster on social media. By the end of Sarah's shift that day, a blurry photo of Michael Jordan sitting at Chuck's counter had been shared hundreds of times. The caption read, "Goat spotted at local diner. Waitress spills coffee on him and gets life-changing surprise." Sarah's phone buzzed constantly with notifications as more people tagged her in posts and comments. She'd never been one for social media. Her Facebook page was mostly pictures of Jasmine's school events. But now, her name was everywhere. Is it true he gave you $1 million? Tracy, another waitress, asked during their afternoon overlap. Did he really buy the whole diner? Mark, the new busboy, chimed in. Sarah kept her head down. focusing on refilling salt shakers. "It's not like that," she said quietly. "He's just helping with some bills while I get back on my feet." But it wasn't that simple, and Sarah knew it. The manila envelope in her bag contained more than just a check. It held possibilities she'd never dared to dream about. The foundation proposal kept running through her mind as she worked, ideas bubbling up like coffee in Chuck's ancient percolator. When she got home that evening, Jasmine was sitting at the kitchen table, her laptop open and her eyes wide. "Mom, you're trending! Look!" She turned the screen to show a local news website. There was the photo again and a headline. "Chicago basketball legend's random act of kindness sparks hope." Sarah set down her bag with a sigh. "Great. Now everyone's going to think—" "Think what?" Jasmine interrupted. "That something good finally happened to someone who deserves it? Mom, read the comments." Reluctantly, Sarah leaned over her daughter's shoulder. The comment section, usually a wasteland of negativity, was filled with surprising warmth. "I remember. Sarah. She helped my grandmother every Tuesday morning for years, never complained when Gran could only leave quarters for tips. That waitress gave my kid free pancakes last month when my card got declined. What goes around comes around. Sarah Thompson is the kind of person we need more of in Chicago. So glad MJ recognized that too." Sarah's vision blurred. She hadn't realized people noticed those small kindnesses. They were just things you did, weren't they? Like her mother always said, kindness isn't kindness if you're keeping score. The next morning, Chuck's diner was packed. People lined up outside, hoping to sit in what they now called the Jordan booth. Sarah moved between tables, in a daze, serving customers who seemed more interested in taking her picture than ordering food. "Sarah!" Chuck called from the kitchen. "Channel 5 is here. They want to interview you." She froze, nearly dropping her coffee pot. No interviews. But the reporter was already setting up near the counter, her cameraman adjusting lights that made the whole diner look artificial. "Just a few questions," the reporter pressed, perfectly manicured nails reaching for Sarah's arm. "Our viewers want to know about your magical moment with Michael Jordan." Sarah stepped back, her heart racing. This wasn't what she wanted, wasn't what any of this was about. She glanced at the notebook peeking out of her apron pocket, where she'd been sketching ideas for the foundation between orders. "I'm sorry," she said firmly, "but I'm not interested in being on TV. This isn't about me, or even about Michael Jordan. It's about something bigger." The reporter's smile faltered. "But surely you want to share your fairy tale moment." "Life isn't a fairy tale," Sarah interrupted, surprising herself with her steady voice. "It's about hard work and community, and sometimes getting help when you need it so you can help others when they need it. That's the real story here." She turned away from the stunned reporter and went back to work. But her words had carried across the quiet diner, and she felt the weight of every customer's gaze. Later that afternoon, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Saw the news crew leaving empty-handed. Good call. Real leaders know when to speak and when to work." MJ Sarah smiled, adding the number to her contacts. Then she pulled out her notebook again, turning to a fresh page. The foundation needed a name, something that captured its spirit. As she wrote, she thought about Mrs. Chen and her quarters, about Mr. Peterson and his tight budget, about all the people working hard just to stay afloat. "What are you always writing in that thing?" Tracy asked during their break. Sarah looked at her co-worker, single mom of 3, taking classes at night, always tired but never complaining. Exactly the kind of person the foundation could help. "Plans," Sarah said simply. "Big ones." That evening, as she walked home under the golden Chicago sunset, Sarah felt different. The weight of constant worry had lifted, replaced by something lighter but more substantial: purpose. Jasmine was waiting at their small kitchen table, homework spread out around her. "Mom, guess what? Jenny's mom says you're inspiring. She's going back to school to get her degree. Says if you can chase your dreams, so can she." Sarah set down her bag, touched and slightly embarrassed. "I haven't done anything yet, baby." "Yes, you have," Jasmine insisted. "You accepted help. Do you know how brave that is? How many people never take that first step because they're too proud?" Sarah looked at her daughter, really looked at her. When had her little girl gotten so wise? "You know what else?" Jasmine continued, pulling up something on her phone. "Remember that picture of you and Michael Jordan at the diner? People are sharing their own stories now. Look at this hashtag, Pass It Forward. It's all about people helping people, inspired by what happened to Chuck's." Sarah sat down heavily. This was bigger than she'd realized. The foundation wasn't just about money or education. It was about changing how people saw themselves and each other. She pulled out her notebook one more time that night. At the top of a fresh page, she wrote, "The Pass It Forward Foundation, because everyone deserves a teammate." Her phone buzzed again, another text from Jordan. "Meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. Bring that notebook of yours. Time to turn those ideas into action." Sarah ran her fingers over the words she'd written. Tomorrow would bring challenges, questions, maybe even doubts. But tonight, sitting in her kitchen with her daughter's proud smile warming the room, she felt ready for whatever came next. She had a team now, and as any basketball legend could tell you, that's when the real magic happens. 6 months had passed since the day Michael Jordan walked into Chuck's diner. The Chicago winter had melted into spring, bringing with it more changes than just the weather. Jordan sat in his office, reviewing the morning's mail. His assistant had placed a plain white envelope on top of the stack, marked only with his name in neat handwriting he recognized immediately. Inside, he found 2 things: a check for the exact amount he'd given Sarah, plus interest, and a leather-bound journal. A note was paper-clipped to the front of the journal. "Before you open this, please know that everything that follows started with your kindness. But kindness, like a basketball, works best when it's passed along. Sarah." Jordan leaned back in his chair, curious. He'd met with Sarah several times over the past months to discuss the foundation, but she'd always kept that mysterious notebook close, sharing only pieces of her plans. Now, as he opened the journal, he began to understand why. The first page was dated the night he'd left the check. "Today, a basketball legend taught me something about pride. Mom always said Thompson women don't take handouts. But what if it's not a handout? What if it's a pass? And the real test isn't whether you can manage alone, but what you do with the ball once it's in your hands." Jordan smiled, turning the page. What followed was 6 months of careful planning, detailed notes, and a vision bigger than he'd imagined. Sarah had taken his initial help and turned it into seed money for a small catering business, operating out of a shared kitchen space during Chuck's off hours. The profit margins were highlighted in her neat handwriting. First month, $427 profit. Set aside $300 for Program A. Program A, he discovered, as he read on, was her own creation. Sarah had identified other service workers in tough spots: single parents, students, people caring for sick relatives. Each month, she set aside money to help one person with a specific need. Teresa's textbooks for nursing school, Marcus's car repair so he could keep delivering food, Lucia's certification, course in bookkeeping, But Sarah hadn't just given them money. The journal detailed how she'd met with each person, helped them make budgets, connected them with resources. She'd created a network of people helping people. Week 12, one entry read, Teresa passed her nursing exam. She's already talking about how she'll help the next person once she's working full-time. The ball keeps moving forward. Jordan found himself completely absorbed in the story unfolding in these pages. Sarah had been quietly building something remarkable, all while continuing to work at Chuck's and take classes at the community college. Month 4, Business Management. 101 is tougher than I expected, but Chuck's letting me practice what I learn on the diner's books. Found 3 places we can cut costs without losing quality. He's putting the savings into fixing that loose tile by the counter. No more coffee accidents. As he read, Jordan noticed a pattern. Every person Sarah helped was already planning how to help someone else. She'd created a ripple effect, turning one act of kindness into dozens. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Jordan? Sarah Thompson is here for your 10 a.m. Jordan checked his watch, surprised to find he'd been reading for nearly 2 hours. Send her in. Sarah entered, looking different from the tired waitress he'd met 6 months ago. She stood taller, wore a simple but professional dress, and carried herself with quiet confidence. But her smile was the same, warm and genuine. I see you got my package, she said, nodding at the journal. Sarah, Jordan shook his head in amazement. Why didn't you tell me about all of this sooner? She sat down, smoothing her dress. I needed to prove something, not to you, but to myself. That I could take help and turn it into something bigger. That pride doesn't have to mean doing everything alone. The foundation proposal, Jordan said slowly. You already had your own version running. A small-scale test run, Sarah nodded. 50 people so far. Each one promising to help someone else when they can. It's not much compared to what the foundation could do, but it's perfect, Jordan interrupted. This is exactly what I had in mind, but better because it came from someone who understands the need firsthand. He held up the check she'd sent. Though I can't accept this. Yes, you can, Sarah said firmly. That money did its job. It helped me help others. Now it can do the same thing again, through the foundation. Keep passing it forward. Jordan studied her for a moment. You know, when I first came to Chuck's, I was looking for investment opportunities in local businesses. Didn't expect to find a business partner instead. Sarah's eyes widened. Partner? The Pass It Forward Foundation needs a director, Jordan said. Someone who understands both sides of helping, giving and receiving. Someone who can turn a simple assist into a game-changing play. He slid a contract across the desk. Interested? Sarah's hands trembled as she picked up the contract, but her voice was steady. There are some conditions. Jordan raised an eyebrow, amused. Such as? I keep working at Chuck's one morning a week, she said, to remember where this started, and to keep finding people who need help. And, she took a deep breath, I want to start a scholarship program for service workers' kids, children like Jasmine, who shouldn't have to worry about college because their parents are struggling. Done and done, Jordan said. Anything else? Sarah pulled out her notebook, a new one, he noticed, and opened it to a fresh page. Actually, yes. I have some ideas about expanding the mentorship program. As they talked, the Chicago spring sunshine streamed through the office windows. On the street below, Chuck's Diner was serving the morning rush. Teresa was there in her nursing scrubs, grabbing coffee before her shift. Marcus had his delivery van running smoothly again, helping Chuck expand his catering business. Lucia was doing the books, having proved so good at it that Chuck hired her part-time. And somewhere in the city, someone else was about to get an E. Unexpected assist, another ball passed forward in this game that Sarah had started. Because sometimes the biggest plays don't end with a score. They end with a whole new way to play the game. In her notebook, Sarah wrote one more line. Day 1 of something bigger than I ever dreamed. Thanks, Mama, for teaching me about pride. And thanks, Michael, for teaching me about teamwork. The truth had emerged, not in headlines or viral photos, but in the quiet ways lives had changed. One cup of spilled coffee had started it all, but it was the hearts of people like Sarah. People who understood that true success means bringing others along with you. That turned that moment into a movement. 1 year to the day after Michael Jordan first walked into Chuck's Diner, Sarah stood in front of a small crowd gathered in the diner's parking lot. Chuck had closed early for the occasion, and the old neon sign cast a warm glow over the faces of everyone who had been part of this journey. Welcome to the official launch of the Pass It Forward Foundation, Sarah began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. But really, we've been unofficial for a while now, haven't we? Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd. Teresa sat in her nursing scrubs, having just finished a shift at the hospital. Next to her was Marcus, who now owned 3 delivery vans and employed other drivers. Lucia had her accounting textbooks tucked under her arm. She was halfway through her CPA certification. A year ago, Sarah continued, I thought success meant handling everything alone. Pride meant never accepting help. She glanced at Jasmine, who beamed from the front row. I was wrong. Real pride isn't about standing alone. It's about helping others stand with you. Michael Jordan stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. Sarah has something to show you all, he said. Something that proves one person's kindness can change a whole community. Sarah nodded to Jasmine, who started a slideshow on the portable screen they'd set up. Pictures flashed by. Teresa tutoring other nursing students. Marcus teaching young drivers about vehicle maintenance. Lucia running free tax preparation workshops for service workers. In 1 year, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger, 50 people in our community received help through our informal network. But here's the amazing part. Those 50 people went on to help over 200 others. Gasps and murmurs ran through the crowd. On the screen, more images appeared. Small business loans being granted, scholarship checks being awarded, mentorship programs in action. And now, Sarah smiled, we're making it official. The Pass It Forward Foundation isn't just about giving help, it's about teaching people how to become helpers themselves. She unrolled a large blueprint, showing plans for a community center right next to Chuck's Diner. This will be our headquarters, free classes in business management, financial literacy, and job training, childcare for working parents, a computer lab for students. And yes, she grinned at Chuck, a much bigger kitchen. Chuck wiped his eyes with his apron, not even trying to hide his tears. My little diner's going to have a pretty fancy neighbor, he said proudly. Actually, Sarah exchanged a look with Jordan. We were hoping to buy the diner too, Chuck. Make it part of our training program. If you're interested in teaching the next generation of food service entrepreneurs. Chuck's mouth fell open. This was the moment Sarah had been waiting for. The chance to help the man who had given her a chance all those years ago. But only if you stay on as head chef and mentor, Jordan added quickly. We need your pancake expertise. The old man's eyes welled up again. Well, he said gruffly, someone's got to make sure you don't mess up my recipes. Laughter and applause filled the air. As Sarah looked around at the gathered faces, her neighbors, her colleagues, her community, she remembered something her mother used to say. Life's not about how high you climb, but how many people you bring up with you. Jasmine stepped up beside her, holding out a familiar object. Sarah's very first notebook, the one where she'd started planning all of this. "Read it, Mom," she whispered. "Read what you wrote that first night." Sarah opened the worn notebook, turning to the first page. Her hands didn't shake anymore as she read, "Today I learned that sometimes the biggest dreams start with the smallest moments. Sometimes it takes spilling coffee on a basketball legend to realize that we're all just people trying to help each other succeed. Mom always said Thompson women don't take handouts. But maybe, just maybe, what looks like a handout is really just the first pass in a much bigger game." Mrs. Chen stood up from her seat, leaning on her cane. "Sarah," she said softly, "remember, when you covered my breakfast that day, I promised I'd pay you back." "Mrs. Chen, you don't need to." But the elderly woman was already walking forward, her grandson helping her. She held out an envelope. "I've been saving my quarters," she said with a smile. "Not for me this time, for your foundation, to help someone else who needs breakfast one day." Sarah took the envelope, tears spilling down her cheeks. Inside were rolls of quarters, probably not more than $30 total, but they felt as valuable as gold. "This," Sarah held up the envelope, her voice thick with emotion, "this is what it's all about. It's not about the amount. It's about understanding that we all have something to give." Jordan stepped up to the microphone. "The foundation will match every donation today, dollar for dollar, or quarter for quarter." He winked at Mrs. Chen. "But more importantly, we'll match every act of kindness with support, every dream with resources, and every person willing to learn with someone willing to teach." As the crowd began to mingle, sharing stories and signing up for programs, Sarah felt a tug on her sleeve. A young waitress from the diner across town stood there, twisting her apron nervously. "Miss Thompson? I'm trying to finish my degree, but with rent and bills." She trailed off, looking down. Sarah smiled, reaching for her new notebook. "Let's talk," she said warmly. "And please, call me Sarah. Now, tell me about your dreams." Later that night, after the crowd had gone home and the cleanup was done, Sarah sat in the Jordan booth with Michael, Chuck, and Jasmine. The diner felt different somehow. Not just a place that served food, but a place where dreams were about to be served too. "So," Jordan said, sliding a folder across the table, "ready to make it official? The paperwork's all done." Sarah looked at the documents that would transfer ownership of Chuck's Diner to the foundation, with Chuck staying on as executive chef and trainer. Next to that was her contract as the foundation's director. "Almost," she said, pulling out her mother's old photo from her pocket, the one taken in front of the homeless shelter. "I just need to add one thing." On the final page of the contract, she wrote, "In memory of Gloria Thompson, who taught me that true strength isn't about standing alone. It's about helping others stand with you." She signed her name, and just like that, everything changed. Yet somehow, everything that mattered had stayed exactly the same. The warmth of community, the dignity of work, and the power of people helping people. "You know what this means?" Jasmine grinned. "Free pancakes for life." "Not so fast," Chuck growled, but his eyes twinkled. "But maybe we can work out a family discount." They all laughed, and Sarah looked around at her team. Her family, really. The basketball legend who'd become a mentor. The boss who'd become a partner. The daughter who'd become an inspiration. And tomorrow, there would be new people to help, new dreams to nurture, new games to play. Because that's the thing about passing it forward. The game never really ends. It just keeps getting bigger, better, and more beautiful with every pass. What an incredible journey from that first spilled cup of coffee. Sarah Thompson's story reminds us that sometimes our biggest setbacks can lead to our greatest comebacks. Her Pass It Forward Foundation continues to help service workers across Chicago achieve their dreams, proving that kindness truly is a gift that keeps on giving. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're reading from. Are there any Pass It Forward moments in your own community? Share your stories of unexpected kindness that made a difference. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share. Just like Sarah, we can all do our part to spread positivity and help others rise. Remember, we're all part of each other's team, no matter where we come from. See you in the next story.